recording my homily for the third Sunday of Ordinary Time in 2019. Last week, I talked a little bit about meekness, and I talked about how meekness was kind of like this quiet confidence. And it's very important to emphasize both words, because to really get a sense of meekness, another person told me, he says he has often thought of it as like humble confidence. You know, it's a confidence that is just much deeper, and it's never going to be super emotional. It's never going to be, if you will, like super popular, you know, that kind of a thing. But it's just this quiet confidence, right? And I talked about how the wedding feast at Cana was an example of that in Mary as well as in her son Jesus. Today I want to talk about joyful confidence. So joyful confidence, and this is a confidence that can, if in a sense, if you understand me correctly and bear me out through my whole homily, to understand how joyful confidence can overpower anything. It can overpower any evil, any darkness, any depression, despair, well, most any, right? It's just so powerful. So joyful confidence, and then for us to be able to have that. So to get started, I want to use a couple stories. So before I was born, when my oldest brother was, I believe, about 2 years old, maybe a little bit older than that, my mom relates the story how she had him at Mass and he was getting all squirmy and just fussy and just, you know, climbing under the pews and all that kind of stuff. And she's trying to hold on to him, you know, like a straitjacket. And you know, in the pews, that's really hard to do, is control a little 2-year-old. And but at some point during the Mass, he just had enough. And so he just screams out in the middle of Mass, "I hate God." Right? I know it sounds really bad, but you know, this is a 2-year-old. A 2-year-old doesn't know what a 2-year-old is saying. And no, he doesn't hate God. He's just frustrated, right? He's just frustrated that he can't run around and play. What do you do when you have a 2-year-old like that? Well, do you get mad at the 2-year-old for that? Did the priest stop Mass and say, "Oh, this kid is going to hell"? You know, no, right? What does a parent do in something like that? Well, maybe the parent just holds the kid a little bit tighter, right? You give them a little bit tighter of a hug. You show them a little bit more love, right? Because they don't know what they're saying. They don't know the significance or ramifications of that. Have you had a child at some point, maybe when they're a little bit older, because sometimes they go through that phase where they tell you, you know, as mom or dad, they tell you, "Oh, I hate you, Dad," or "I hate you, Mom," right? Or even as a teenager, you tell your son or daughter that they can't do something, they can't go to the prom, or I don't know, whatever. And they say, "Well, I hate you." How do you respond to that? You give them a big hug, right? Your love for them so overpowers anything like that, that statement or even that feeling is not going to harm your feelings towards them. It's not going to change your feelings towards them. If anything, it's like, I need to give this child a bigger hug, you know what I'm saying? So what about when adults come up to you and they say, "Well, I hate God"? They probably won't say it that way, right? But they'll say, you know, I don't want faith. Don't talk to me about faith. You know, the wall goes up, right? It's like, what do? You say, "Okay, all right, I'll back off," right? You know, when a family member is that way, we say, "Oh, okay, this person's here. I'm not going to talk about Jesus," because they don't like Jesus, right? What about joyful confidence? What about this joyful, powerful confidence in Jesus Christ? What about realizing that this person in some ways is making a 2-year-old statement, right? They just simply do not know the ramifications of what they are saying. And so you want to give them a big hug. If we have that joyful confidence, now I don't mean literally just go up and give them a big hug. Maybe that's inappropriate, right? But I mean, spiritually speaking, we don't take what they're saying so seriously, because we know in the end it is a spiritually 2-year-old statement. No, they don't hate God, because if they knew God, if they could think clearly, if they could enter in this relationship deeper, they would love God. And you, as a disciple, because you love God and know God, you desire to share that with them in that moment. Not get all offended, but to share that love with them. And so joyful confidence. A little story about someone who struggled to get that, but desired it and has since come to have that joyful confidence. So when we were on our way to the March for Life last week, we were carpooling, and one of the passengers gave me a CD to play. Well, we didn't end up playing it while we were going down or coming home, but it was left in my car. And so just this last week, as I'm running around doing my errands, I put the CD in and I start listening to it. Well, it's this gentleman who's giving his conversion story. He has since become a deacon in the Catholic Church. But he's telling about his life. So he starts when he was a young boy, and there's this one day, he just kind of notices that his dad's not going to church. And so he asks his dad, he says, "Dad, why don't you go to church? Why don't you go to Mass?" And his dad simply says, "Never ask me that question again." Now, I can totally be in the place of that little boy and to hear a dad say that and say, "Okay, I'm never going to ask that question again. The wall went up and I'm going to obey," right? Well, so he obeyed. He never asked that question again, and he never allowed his little mind to go down that path. It's like, nope, dad doesn't even want to talk about it, right? It's kind of sad, but that's what happened, okay? Well, years later, as a young man, this son becomes very successful, but he's also missing something in his life. He's not very close to God, and so he has this powerful conversion experience. And he begins to truly live his faith, and it changes everything in his life. Well, you fast forward even a bunch more years, and his dad's dying. The same dad who said, "Yeah, never ask me that question again." His dad's dying. His dad's in the nursing home. His dad is elderly. And this son is at church praying one day, or he's just praying, and he just feels this overwhelming voice saying to him inside of him, saying, "Talk to your dad about me." So he knows that's Jesus. He says, "Talk to your dad about me." And his response is, that little boy, it's like, "Nope, not going to do it." Because it brings up so much fear. He's back to being that little boy with his dad. But the voice won't go away. It's just haunting him. "Talk to your father about me." So he goes to visit his dad, and he's kind of beating around the bush, right? He's talking about everything except Jesus. Well, finally, he says to his dad, he says, "Look, Dad, I gotta talk to you about something. Can we turn off the TV and can we talk?" And so his dad turns off the TV, and he says, "Sure, son, what do you want to talk about?" And he says, "Well, I need to talk to you about Jesus." And he's ready for the worst, right? He's ready for his father just to say, "Don't ever, no, I said, don't talk." But his dad doesn't say that. His dad says, "I am so grateful because I was worried that nobody would talk to me about him before I died." They have this powerful conversation, right? But he's kicking himself, the son, for being so afraid, for allowing that little boy fear to so overwhelm him throughout his whole life, that he didn't have that joyful confidence in his faith that would overcome that little fear, right? To have that joyful confidence for ourselves. That when somebody responds in a negative way, it doesn't mean that we respond by pushing back or fighting or arguing, but it will not destroy our love. Our love can overcome. A little story about that. So I'm almost finished reading a book on Saint Edmund Campion. St. Edmund Campion. So when he was a young man, he was incredibly intelligent, and his intelligence, his ability to learn started to become known all throughout England at that time. Just a very, very stellar person, right? And this was during the time when in England they were beginning to outlaw Catholicism, the Catholic faith. And so this is when Anglicanism is rising, and they're trying to expel all the influences of the Roman Catholic Church. So this is, 500 years ago. Well, Edmund at this time, he really doesn't care. He's not into his faith, so he switches faith. He becomes Anglican, no big deal, right? Didn't seem like it was all that big of a deal, wasn't that big of a change, and so he just goes with the flow. Well, through the course of a few years, he begins to study, he goes abroad, he studies, but he has this powerful encounter with God, and so he begins to realize that he has to take his faith seriously. And he chooses to be Roman Catholic. Well, not only does he choose to be Roman Catholic, he chooses to become a Jesuit. He becomes a priest, right? He studies to become a priest. Well, just to give you perspective, at that time, there was no other order that the Anglicans feared or despised as much as the Jesuits, because the Jesuits were powerful, not powerful like power, like earthly power. They were powerful in influencing people to see the faith as it is, as it truly is. They were powerful missionaries, and anyone who was opposed to the Catholic Church was, maybe you say, was afraid or just hated the Jesuits. Well, that was no big deal, because Edmund was not in England. He had joined the Jesuits, he had become part of the province that was in Austria, and so his life was pretty much at peace. There was no issue with that. Well, the Holy Spirit works in very strange and mysterious ways, right? Well, his superiors begin to discern that they want to have a presence in England. Now, at the time, there was a seminary in France that was exclusively built for young men who would be ordained priests and go back to England. Now, these men knew what was going to happen. I mean, it was literally a flip of the coin. It was a 50-50 chance whether they would live or die going back to England. 50% of all the priests who snuck back into England to operate as priests would end up being executed at that time. So they ask Edmund to go back. Now his brothers in the order, his brother Jesuits, they know what that means. But they're not afraid for him. And to say that they were happy for him, you could only understand that correctly if we understand what it means to have joyful confidence in Jesus Christ. There's a joy in bringing the gospel where the gospel's not wanted. It's like running up to that 2-year-old who says they hate God and giving him a great big hug. The night before he leaves, they paint this mural over his bed, just this simple mural of these flowers. Well, the design that they were using of painting these flowers was a symbol of martyrdom. And it was for them just, I think, in their way expressing an affection for him, but also their admiration for him and what he was about to be doing. And so there he was lying on this last night before he goes back to England, and he's looking up at this mural, and he knows what's coming. But he wasn't afraid because of that joyful confidence in God's grace, in God, in bringing the gospel. It's not a patronizing love when we say that someone who hates God, someone who says that they hate God, is like a 2-year-old, because spiritually they are like a 2-year-old. But again, I'm not saying in a patronizing way. It's just, if only they knew, right? And if only our love would transcend their childish hatred. So he goes back into England, and it's and he's doing the cat and mouse game. It's really silly when you think about it. How they're chasing these priests around, and priests are going into homes and hiding in cupboards and hiding in secret hiding places, and it seems really silly. But the people so much just to have their confession heard, just to receive the Eucharist. They were willing to risk their own lives. And many times people were arrested just to protect the priests. But in the end, it was risky and the priests knew it. And even though they were running around hiding, it wasn't fear. It was just so they could continue the mission. Well, there's this one moment, so people know Edmund is back, because the people knew Edmund. He was very well known. Even the Queen and the royalty knew Edmund. And so he's back, and so they're really hunting him down, right? Because he's a Jesuit, and he has a lot of influence on people. Well, someone writes this pamphlet against the Catholic Church, and it's just so absurd what they said. The lies were just so crazy. So Edmund feels like he has to respond. So he writes a pamphlet, and it gets distributed, right? It gets printed and distributed, and everybody reads it. Even the Queen reads it. And in this pamphlet, he talks about how he knows he's going to die. He knows the Queen is going to kill him. So the Queen Elizabeth, was in charge at the time. And he says, I know that the Queen, wants to kill me. And it's really sad. But then he says that his one desire is that she can go to heaven. His one desire is that she can be with him, that they can both, and everybody else can be in heaven. And so there's no hatred. It's just love. And so all the lies and the hatred that's being thrust upon him, and the threats and the violence, he eventually, he's going to become a martyr. They tortured him when they finally did catch him, and he just loved them. And to have that joyful love. So Jesus in the gospel, I totally forgot about talking about the gospel. So Jesus in the gospel, he's back in his hometown, right? He's back in his hometown. And he goes to the synagogue and he reads from Isaiah, and you have this powerful scripture passage where, this Messiah, this anointed one, is going to come and is going to heal the sick and give sight to the blind and free the oppressed and the imprisoned, and all these beautiful things. And he says, it's fulfilled in your hearing. In other words, that's me. Now, at the end of the gospel on Sunday, it's beautiful. It's this beautiful moment. But the gospel doesn't end right there. Right after that, the conversation goes really bad. And they reject Jesus. They lead him outside the town. This is Nazareth, right, where he grew up. They lead him outside the town and they throw him off the edge of this hillside. And they probably intended to kill him. But he doesn't, they don't kill him at that time. And again, do you think he hated them at that point? Do you think he went and sulked over it? Do you think he said, well, okay, fine. This is like dad saying, don't ever ask me that question again. Or this is like the 2-year-old saying, I hate you. Or did it change the way Jesus felt about them? When you and I sin, does it change the way Jesus feels about us? Isn't his love just so overpowering? And I don't mean overpowering like it takes away our free will, but his love is just so magnanimous. When we go into confession and maybe we're struggling and we're feeling, how could God love me? And he just wants to smother us with his love. I think as parents, you can relate to that. When your child's been hurt, when something's happened, when they've done something bad, you just want to smother them with your love. Joyful confidence. All right? May God grant us that grace. God bless you.